Happy Friday, DawgNation. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm glad you're here. I know you're looking forward to hearing Jeff Sintel on our program today. Been a while since we've been able to catch up with Jeff. We'll look forward to doing that here on today's program. Excited about that. A lot of recruiting news to get to. I'm also going to start the show with something today as well. Deandre Baker said something this week that got some attention. I'm actually a little bit surprised it even got attention. I think it's semi-relevant for Baker and his NFL future, but there is a takeaway from this that I think is specifically relevant for Georgia moving forward. That's the point that I want to kind of hit the hardest on that. We'll talk about Zamir White. I will close the loop on a conversation I tried to have yesterday and just ran out of time on how different or not different this Georgia offense is going to be this season. So we got a lot to cram into the next hour or so. We're glad you're with us and a part of it as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There are times in my life I sort of semi-feel sorry for some of the players, football players, who have people like me sticking microphones in their face all the time. You may have seen back on Wednesday, we were at Pro Day and in Athens the day before that for some of the player availability and Kirby Smart availability, and some of you have made fun of my very serious listening face that shows up there. But I am in those scenarios like a lot of the other people. It's microphone there. We're throwing questions at the guys. They say whatever they think the best answer is in the moment, and sometimes this kind of stuff kind of spirals into something a little bit bigger than probably they intended for it to be. And even me, sometimes I'm kind of amazed at how some of this kind of stuff kind of turns into a thing when at face value it sort of doesn't seem like it was. An example of that may be from Deandre Baker. And even if overall this isn't that big of a deal, which I don't think it is, I still think it's semi-interesting for reasons I'm going to try to explain over the course of the next couple of minutes. So Baker was a part of Pro Day on Wednesday, and I think it's probably safe to say when it comes to Baker's overall feeling about the NFL draft process, he wants to be thought of more for his performance on the field than he wants to be thought of for his performance in NFL scouting combines and pro days and kind of anything that involves a stopwatch. That's really not what Baker is. And by the way, we ought to already know this because Baker's recruiting profile coming out of high school was not of the five-star variety. So he always played better than that. So Baker, I think, would look back on his career thus far and say, hey, you know, football on the games in between the white lines played on Saturdays, did you watch me then? You already knew that I didn't measure out the way that some of these other guys do. Otherwise, I would have been a five-star recruit back then. I'm a guy that's shown up on the field and played really well. And so I think he brings maybe a little bit of an extra edge, the Jim Thorpe Award winner from last year from Georgia in 2018. I think he brings a little bit of an extra edge to the draft conversation because I believe that Baker feels like he's been proving something on a field now for a number of years, and he's being poked and prodded by, draft scouts now who may or may not have any idea of what they're doing. So that, to me, is part of the motivation for how Deandre Baker is approaching this phase of his life, heading towards the draft in April. In fact, he talked a little bit about that with some reporters this week, including our own DawgNation Chip Towers, Mike Griffith on hand. Connor Riley and I were on hand as a part of the DawgNation video team. Listening to Baker talk just a bit, here is some of what he had to say about the draft process thus far. Here's Deandre Baker.
I'm relieved that I got everything, all the testing done and things like that. Now I can just work on football drills and things like that. But, it's kind of exciting because the draft coming up April 25th, so that's the biggest day of my life, what I've been waiting on. So I'm looking forward to that. I just want to see your raw speed, the raw vert, other than any game. So it's just another way to test. But, you all got to put it together on film like I do all the time. So I don't really pay no attention, really.
Do you hear get feedback from NFL executives and stuff that, we saw what
oh, yeah, definitely.
We see you tape.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You can't, my film is undeniable. You can't overlook that, what I do.
In other comments to other reporters, Baker was even more emphatic about how he views his own game film and his own performance. The Associated Press records him as having said, my film speaks for itself. My stats, everything. My production, week in and week out. You go back to 2017 or the first day I started, and here's the phrase that gets the most attention. I was the best cornerback in the nation. And he goes on to say a lot of NFL teams have told him indeed that he was the best cornerback in the nation. So here you have a cornerback saying, I believe I go into the draft having proven over the last couple of years that I was the best cornerback in college football and therefore the best cornerback in this NFL draft. Now, a part of me wants to say when it comes to this kind of discussion, what do you want a guy like that to say? It's sort of like the guy who, says his team's going to win going into college football Saturday. Would you assume that he thinks his team's going to lose. And for a guy like Baker, who's a competitor of the highest order, would you assume that he doesn't think he's the best overall cornerback? So there's a part of me that wonders why what Baker says even gets as much attention as it does, but it has gotten a little bit of attention, the fact that Baker has put it out there that he thinks he's the best. In fact, the NFL Network show, Good Morning Football, that you may have seen, had a little bit of debate about this. Now, it's worth pointing out that everyone who speaks here is going to be complimentary of Baker, but they clearly seem to notice that Baker calls himself the best, including among them Nate Burleson here. Here's a conversation from Good Morning Football about DeAndre Baker, where Baker's minor boast, I guess, gets a bit of attention. Here's the NFL Network.
Corners have got a corner. You know what I'm saying? This is not a left guard. Of course, I'm thinking of Richard Sherman screaming at Aaron Andrews, well, I'm the best corner in the game, and he was. Yeah. You got to be a little greedy, especially when one of your competitors at the position is a guy literally named Greedy. Okay? Like, go get it, man. You're the best. Not only the best in the game, you're the best in the world. You're better than Deion. You're better than Woodson. Go, corner's going to corner. I love it.
Is that what a GM and a coach, is that what you want to hear? Do you want a guy just to come right out and say, I'm the best, or do you want a little bit of more of that humility?
No, you want a guy that is an absolute dog and a short-term memory. You want a guy that's overconfident. Even when he gets beat, he can bounce right back and act like it didn't happen.
So I think the guys on the NFL Network and the gal there are making a pretty good point that at the quarterback position in particular, that level of confidence, self-belief is probably important, and that's probably true. And ultimately, I think there really is a good chance that DeAndre Baker is the best cornerback in this draft, and I think he has been proving out on the field for Georgia, and I think that it's not wrong for Baker to say what he said, and I imagine that most Georgia fans probably agree with that. But let me see if I can, for at least a minute or two here, spin this into a different direction. When you watch DeAndre Baker this week, or when you watch DeAndre Baker over the last couple of years, you really see from Baker what I believe is supposed to be a very nice blueprint for how Georgia behaves going forward. Because as Georgia moves on now without DeAndre Baker, they kind of do so as a little bit of a different kind of program than they were when Baker was making a name for himself as a defensive back, especially when you go back to 2017. That's the year that Baker really kind of came into his own, and by the end of the year, he'd actually gotten a pretty good, I think, draft evaluation, but chose to come back to school anyway. But Baker really became a top-flight player in 2017. But the attitude around Georgia at that time was, remember Revenge Tour, and remember all the people who had said all the bad things about Georgia after it had lost to Vanderbilt and lost to Georgia Tech and lost to, really whomever else you want to put in there. There were a lot of critics of the Georgia program. And there became, I think, this intense motivation for let's go out and prove the people wrong who are saying bad stuff about us. And that really worked in 2017. And for a lot of programs who have that opportunity to shut up critics or vanquish people who are negative about you, I think in football that motivation can kind of work a lot. But now in 2019, Georgia doesn't really have that as much anymore. I mean, yes, there's the opposing fan who takes the occasional pot shot. But when you really look at the media and what it says about Georgia during the offseason, there is no more revenge to be gotten. I mean, Kirby Smart's going to get a lot of praise heading into 2019. The Georgia roster, as it's put together, is going to get a lot of praise heading into 2019. There is, still some substantial questions to be answered about Georgia, some holes that need to be filled, including Baker's absence in particular. But there is very little in the way of external motivation in terms of how Georgia approaches this upcoming season. So what do you do for your own motivation when you don't have any more revenge to get? I think that's a very fair question to ask about Georgia. And I think that the way that DeAndre Baker behaved this week and has behaved over the course of his Georgia career is actually a pretty good blueprint person to follow in the footsteps of as Georgia tries to chart its own path. Because the best way I can describe DeAndre Baker is he shows confidence in that quote that I just read or the audio that I just played. But over the course of his Georgia career, I think what you would say is it's kind of a quiet confidence from Baker, right? I mean, even if you want to go back to the South Carolina game when Deebo Samuel said all the things that Samuel said, never having heard of DeAndre Baker and essentially putting himself up on a pedestal that he wasn't willing to allow DeAndre Baker to stand on him with. And Baker didn't have a whole lot to say before the game, but very early in that game in Columbia back in September, he's got the pick six, and all of a sudden Baker did his talking on the field. All of a sudden Baker got the last laugh and that little spat with Deebo Samuel because of how he actually played in the game. And that quiet confidence is, I think, what Georgia needs more of going into 2019. When there's no more revenge to get, when there are no more critics to vanquish, it's your own internal motivation to go out there and prove that you're the best that really matters more than anything else. In fact, Kirby Smart talked a little bit about this. The idea that going into that South Carolina game, there was a lot of trash talk coming from the Gamecock. Kirby made it clear post-game in Columbia back in September that's not what he wants Georgia to be about. Here's Kirby from then.
We didn't sell that or preach that. I mean, they put something up in the weight room, a sticker, but I wanted discipline and composure. And playing in this environment, it's a lot more about discipline and composure. Sometimes when you get into all that disrespect, you get chippy, you make bad decisions. I knew it was going to be a chippy kind of game because both staffs are intense and both programs are physical, but we didn't want our guys getting stupid penalties, and I thought they managed themselves really well in that regard. I don't like using disrespect as a motivating factor.
I mean, listen, I'm going to tell you this right now. I believe there's a lot of clown show behavior in the SEC East over the last couple of years. I think that Deebo Samuel, although I believe Samuel's a good player, I think he embarrassed himself with the way that he talked about DeAndre Baker before the South Carolina game a year ago. How many examples over the last couple of years have we just kind of rolled our eyes at some goofball from Florida saying some goofy thing about, some level of dominance they were going to show in the football field, and ultimately the Gators weren't able to go out there and validate that trash talk. That's not what Georgia's going to be about. But there is still a room for a quiet, and there is still a room for what I would describe from Baker, kind of a matter-of-fact assessment of the situation. I believe I'm the best. I'm going to go out there and show it. On the field over the last couple of years, that's indeed what Baker has done. In the NFL as a rookie or come draft night, will Baker show that again at the pro level? My guess is he probably will. But one way or another, what Baker has done is what Georgia needs more of. More guys who truly do have the confidence to believe in themselves. Guys who truly believe, you know what, I am the best. And I'm going to go out there and defend that belt and hold on to that crown by the way that I play on college Saturdays. That is a dose of attitude that I think this Georgia team in 2019 probably will have and will probably make pretty good use of. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're live on video, 10 a.m. at DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. And boy, won't the radio there on 960 The Ref be hot this weekend. Georgia baseball all three of the next nights, Friday night, then on Saturday and Sunday as they host LSU. We'll have more on that in a moment. 960 The Ref is your radio home for the Georgia Bulldogs. Looking forward to hearing some of that this weekend. And, of course, we're in podcast form wherever you find podcasts, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. It's great to have you as a part of our program today. We will get Jeff Sintel here coming up in just a moment. Have not caught up with Jeff on the recruiting news on this program in a while because we were in Athens for a couple of days this week. But I'm looking forward to getting that from him coming up in just a couple of minutes. Also, I want to follow up on something that we talked about on, was it Wednesday's show? I think it was Wednesday from Athens, and then I tried to do a little more on yesterday. We just kind of ran out of time. I've been really interested to follow the conversation of Georgia fans over the course of this offseason and this week in particular because of something that I said earlier in the week. My point earlier in the week was, for Georgia fans who all love Kirby Smart, no one would deny that, there is an element of Smart's overall opinion that not every Georgia fan necessarily agrees with. It does not sound like Kirby Smart, based on what he said this week, is really all that dissatisfied with how his offense has looked over the last couple of years. A lot of Georgia fans seeing Jim Chaney now at Tennessee as the offensive coordinator say, well, now's the chance to reboot. Now's the chance to add in all the new wrinkles that we've wanted to see a part of this thing. And Kirby Smart's probably going to say that Jim Chaney was the Achilles heel, the reason why Georgia has not won a national championship in the last two seasons. And it's going to be way, way different this upcoming season. I said this week, based on Kirby Smart, maybe that's not so much the case. In fact, I think Kirby Smart was pretty emphatic that what Georgia has been, we're going to get more of here this upcoming season. Here's more from Kirby from this week.
Look, we've been really successful at running the ball. That's who we are at Georgia. So we're not going to go recreate the wheel and say, okay, well, now we're going to open up and be an empty spread team every down and go high tempo. You do what makes you successful. And he had a meeting with the offense yesterday, which I sat in, and he talked about balance. What is balance? People think balance means 50-50. That balance is not 50-50. Balance is being able to run the ball when you have to run the ball and being able to throw the ball when you have to throw the ball. So can you do both? Yes, you can be successful at both. That might be 70-30 one game and then 30-70 the other way the next game. So I think we're going to be successful at that because I think that's going to be based on having good players. But I don't think that we're going to say, okay, we're throwing out everything we've done, we're starting over. We really had one coaching change on the offensive side of the ball, and every year when you go reinvent yourself, you say, okay, who are my best players? How are we going to get them the ball? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are the things we got to really work on? And we've done that for almost 2 months now, because our signing class was pretty much done in January. We've been working on us and saying, okay, what can we do better? And I think James brings a lot of that to the table. They've gone and visited with a lot of people to get new ideas.
I think what Kirby says there is certainly more right than wrong from my perspective, but I do believe that a lot of Georgia fans are a little disappointed hearing that continued commitment to what sounds like an imbalance in favor of the run over the pass. For the people who do feel that way, though, maybe Georgia tight end Charlie Werner gave you a little bit of reason for hope if you are looking for at least some changes to the Georgia offense, because when Werner spoke to reporters yesterday, and you can see the full video of this, the DawgNation YouTube page, Werner said, you know what, maybe Coley's going to throw the ball more than some of y'all might think or might realize. Here is Werner on that.
I think his first instinct would be to throw. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I don't know. I can definitely see us throwing a little bit more, which I think would help us in the run game as well. You know, opens up the run game because they're scared of the pass. So,
I mean, ultimately, I love Charlie, of course, but I think that's probably more wishful thinking than anything else, because I do believe that Coley was probably hired to be a continuation of what Georgia's done on offense. And I, as I said before, for the most part, think that's probably the right decision. I do believe the offense that Georgia has run can win a national championship. It's been close, I think, the last couple of years, arguably in that playoff conversation, both of those years. The only thing I would find a little bit of fault with is when Kirby Smart says, when it comes to throwing the ball, can we throw it when we need to, or can we throw it when we have to? I mean, I guess the only thing that I would hope to see the offense evolve with, at least somewhat, when it comes to James Coley this year is it's not just about throwing when you have to, when you need to, 3rd and 9, some situation like that, or maybe when you're down by 2 touchdowns. For me, it's more about throwing the ball when you have an opportunity to. Can you go out and turn a close game into a blowout? Or can you go out there and take advantage of a defense that's trying to stop the run? Can you see an opportunity to exploit that? I don't need a lot more throws per game. I just need a little bit. And I need to look for those opportunities when you have a chance to go for the home run. That's personally what I'm hoping to see from the James Coley offense here this season. All right, so I think that's kind of interesting stuff. We'll continue to watch Georgia fans weigh in on that. Before we get Jeff's intel, let me also squeeze in our Kroger kickoff here. We kick off the weekend in style with our friends at Kroger, and there is a lot to think about when it comes to UGA athletics this weekend. Let me kind of rattle through some of this. You got men's and women's tennis, and boy, those tennis teams have been doing great. They got Ole Miss today there in Athens. Softball starts a series with LSU, also there in the Classic City. The big one to pay attention to, though, sold out all 3 days. Friday night tonight with Emerson Hancock on the mound. Then Saturday and Sunday, 2 games televised on the SEC Network. As the Diamond Dogs host traditional power LSU, that's going to be a lot of fun. And the Gym Dogs, of course, got the SEC Championships coming up on Saturday. So it's a fun time for spring sports around UGA. And it's a big way to kick off the weekend with our friends at Kroger there. By the way, speaking of Kroger and everything else that's going on, it's the right time to score big on savings for March Madness at your local Kroger. You can save big on fresh Purdue chicken wings, 2-liter bottles of Coke or Pepsi, vegetable trays, and more. A lot of you got some great parties going on to watch some of the hoops here this weekend. Don't forget to allow Kroger to help you stock up for that party and save at your local Atlanta Kroger. All right, I'm going to talk about Zamir White a bit later on in the program. I think there's some interesting stuff to be said about what Kirby said about Zeus here this week. But before we get to that, though, let's do a recruiting update with our buddy Jeff Sintel. It's great to have you with us on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Good stuff from Jeff Sintel, and good to have him back on the program here on a DawgNation Daily. Always a lot of fun. Jeff, welcome back to the program. Feels like it's been a while since we have done this, but it's nice to have you here. Hope you're doing well.
Brandon, my man, did you remember where the light switch was and the microphone was in the studio? You've been on the road so much, man.
Oh, yeah, listen, it was nice to be back here. I sort of said, kind of like metaphorically speaking, sleeping in your own bed. Kind of nice to be back in the studio, our world headquarters studios. I love being in Athens, and I like, getting out on the road and stretching our legs a bit. But there's also something nice to be said about, kind of being in here and being back in the friendly confines as well. So that was really nice, and it's also nice to have you back in here on your customary spot on Friday as well. And, Jeff, you've certainly given us plenty to talk about on the pages of DawgNation.com this week, including a really interesting update on 5-star running back Kendall Milton having a chance to catch up with his dad. And you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but what I heard from Milton's camp here from your piece at DawgNation.com was about as good as I could have hoped to have heard. Now, obviously, you'd love to hear him say it's Georgia and it's nobody else. I don't expect to hear that right now. I expect him to go through his deliberations. the fact that he's going to give, at least according to your reporting, and I'll let you add some meat to this bone in a moment, but he's going to give Georgia that unofficial visit, saving Georgia a chance to then lure him later on with the official visit to maybe what I would hope is maybe sealing the deal. I thought the update from you on Milton at DawgNation.com was incredibly good news. From a fan's perspective, would you take it the same way?
Brandon, did you like that terminology? Well, first of all, I got to say, I knew you were going to lead with the 5-star running back, Brandon. I just know you, sir.
Yeah, listen, I'm very easy to. I'm not very unpredictable when it comes to stuff like that.
You're like, oh, did somebody say 5-star running back? And then there's Brandon coming running to the door, ready to hit that lane. Well, I think to answer your question, my man, I think the thing there is, I think the term without a doubt that they're going to visit Georgia, and there's a tour there in the spring involving Alabama, involving LSU, and also involving Georgia. I think they might want to sneak in one or two more, but they're also the visit to Georgia would also probably be tethered to a visit to a Georgia practice. That would be highly interesting as well. And we've said this before about Kendall Milton. So I know people wanted to kick the microphone or to slam their Eddie the Blind Squirrel stuffed plush toy into the trash when Georgia saw guys like John Emery Jr. and Ty Davis and even Trey Sanders eventually matriculate into other directions in the University of Georgia. But, last year's pain could probably be 2020's gain. And what I mean by that is Kendall Milton wants to go to a spot where he knows he can come in and play right away. And you look at these, and they feel convinced that he can play right away as a freshman, and rightfully so, 6'2", 220 with all that film he's got, no doubt about that. But with LSU, they just stocked up with two very upper echelon elite running backs. Alabama added Trey Sanders. Georgia, although they got Kenny McIntosh, is also going to be losing Brian Harry, and no matter what, DeAndre Swift is definitely eyeing pro day at Georgia with a very specific reason, knowing that that's in his future as well. So for me, and for lots of folks out there, I think Kendall Milton, the pedigree of Georgia, don't think he didn't notice what Georgia had at the Super Bowl this past year with Sony Michel and Todd Gurley. I think things do set up as good as anyone right now for Kendall Milton in Georgia, especially when you have to remember that his family has no qualms at all about Kendall Milton going across the country to go play college ball. Ohio State's in there. Lots of other schools are also in there, but you have to like the fact that Georgia gets the unofficial, which would also maybe set the tone for an official.
Yeah.
And most of those are going to likely happen now in May, in April and May as well. So that's something to really think about there with Kendall Milton.
And I think, as you pointed out, I think it's really, really interesting that the family has basically said, no, we don't mind 3,000 miles worth of distance here. That's also a big domino to fall in that Kendall Milton recruitment. It's a special edition of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All with Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily. Let me, if you don't mind, go a little deeper in the weeds on this Milton topic just for a moment, because what it sounds like Milton is going to do, and maybe visiting Alabama, maybe visiting LSU, kind of a tour of a lot of these very running back heavy Southern programs. It does sound a little bit like what Paris Johnson, the Ohio State commit, the offensive lineman, recently did on his own Southern tour. And I guess, Jeff, the one concern I might have about Milton on this is when you visit so many places over the same basic period of time, does it give a chance for a program like Georgia to stand out among the rest? Now, maybe the side-by-side, apples-to-apples comparison really works in Georgia's favor, but sometimes, how this goes, Jeff, when you do a lot of traveling all at once, it's kind of a whirlwind. You can barely remember where you are in any given moment. So the fact that it's kind of a tour of the South as opposed to a specific visit to Georgia, does that lessen Kirby's and Del McGee's opportunity to make an impact?
I think the big things here is maybe different than the Johnson recruitment. As Johnson was going with a couple of his other high school teammates, some area guys, and everybody. It was really an exposure tour for all three of those guys to check out schools. I think with Milton, this is an example of mom and dad are coming, and really what they're trying to do is he hasn't published and released top 10, but really he's really working off the top 7 or top 8 right now. And the goal from there, and in some ways it's a quasi-elimination tour. What he wants to do is figure out which ones are 6, 7, and 8 that need to be lopped off the block, and then he has 5 finalists, 5 official visits, and then they'll go from there. And the neat little arithmetic on all that is only like 1 or 2 of those will be conducted during the football season in September. They have a bye week. They have a Thursday game. And really, they can really see themselves, and they can really see Kendall making his decision after all those officials are done, kind of like September, October, that type of range. At least that's the case as of right now.
Yeah, I think it'll be very much a story worth following. Let me talk about something else you've written at DawgNation.com, which I thought was really fun, and it gets you excited about what you may see in the field, as soon as this fall, and that's Nakobe Dean and some of the comparisons of Roquan Smith from some of the people who know him best. And Jeff, this has actually kind of been, even before you wrote this, a little bit of a topic for us on DawgNation Daily, whether it be in the comment section or some of the stuff that we've done on social media, where I am a believer for now, as excited as I am about Roquan, or I should say it's Nakobe Dean, Freudian slip there, as excited as I am about Dean, to me, the next Roquan label right now still rests with Channing Tindall because he's a year ahead and he's going to have an opportunity maybe as a second-year guy that Dean as a first-year guy might not have. Now, we may just find out that Dean is so special that he actually kind of defies previous comparisons. But how would you compare Dean, not just in terms of Roquan Smith, but the other next Roquans who are already on the Georgia roster?
Yeah, that's kind of funny. This is really, Brandon, to me, this is really the first time that, to me, the Roquan comparison kind of stuck. And that's because their body types are so similar.
Okay.
They're built on lateral quickness. You got to remember, Channing Tindall is just a heck of an athlete. He was a guy that initially was seen as an outside linebacker. When you look at Nakobe, I think some of the things there that, with the Roquan Smith narrative that I pointed out in that copy was that you have Roquan, and you got to remember Roquan. He came in about 204, 205, 206, a little undersized. He came in June. He also came in amongst, basically Roquan let Jake Gaines, who was a Georgia MVP, a transfer from UAB, he let kind of Jake Gaines kind of show him the ropes about the position, especially that first season he was in Athens, so he was mostly a special teams guy. He needed to put on some weight or a suit of armor, as folks like to say, in order to play inside the box in the SEC. Well, Nakobe Dean won't have any of those druthers. Nakobe Dean is probably 220, 222 right now. That's pretty good weight. Remember, Roquan is only now into his 230-pound range as an NFL professional. But the other thing I think that helps Nakobe Dean, even with that glimmer from those coaches of seeing maybe Nakobe Dean is a guy that's already reading his keys a little bit more, looking at the guards, looking at the way the ball is going, and knowing where the ball is going pre-snap. But he's also a guy that's in early. He's enrolled early. He's already physically fitting the part. He's known as a very high football IQ guy, a worker-type guy, a very strong guy. It was one of those things, but we kind of kidded about it because it almost seemed like, when the recruiting guy wanted to make a 10-second sound bite and kind of sound really cool, is to drop that Roquan Smith player parallel. And I kind of just went, forgive the son of the South coming out at me here a little bit, but I just said, dadgummit, let me just talk to the two guys that would know it. I put Roquan's film in front of Brad Boyette, and I put Nakobe Dean in front of Larry Harold, and I said, I want you to think about this guy compared to your guy when they were on their way to Georgia, and tell me what you really feel. And I kind of thought there would be some sort of a partiality. It'd be like, somebody saying, like, getting one of those guys to admit somebody else's daughter is smarter or prettier or something like that. But they were real, Brandon, and they were talking about this and this. And, to me, that's what I led the story with, is when the Horn Lake coach called me up and he says, Jeff, I'm looking at this film here, and I've got two screens up. He was like, I'm getting confused because I don't know which one's Nakobe and I don't know which one's Roquan. I have to keep coming back to it. And then to me, that was finally just said, you know what, guy, embrace it. Say all the right things about he needs to be his own man. He needs to do his own thing. But those folks that say Roquan Smith and Nakobe Dean in the same sentence a lot, well, they're really on to something with that.
It's a great story. I hope folks see it at DawgNation.com. And as I said, it's just a ton of fun because, who doesn't love, good high school coaches looking back on great players who've, come through the ranks. Nakobe now on his way to Georgia. Roquan making a big name for himself at the college, at the NFL level. And it's fun to think that one day Georgia could have a linebacker that plays at that caliber, and obviously Nakobe Dean has a great chance to do that. Let me follow up, though, real quick, Jeff, on an opinion that I've expressed, and you tell me if I'm wrong about this. If you look back at Kirby's first 3 years, certainly 2016, 2017, 2018, Georgia really needed freshmen at that point in time, or the roster, the two deep, wasn't going to be fully filled out. In 2019, the need for freshmen isn't as great because this is the deepest roster that Kirby's coached up to this point. So, therefore, if a freshman really breaks out this year, then to me, that's a different kind of freshman. You know, you're talking about Nakobe Dean, not only following the footsteps of Roquan Smith, but if Nakobe ends up on the field a lot, as deep as the inside linebacker position is for Georgia, then you're talking about a truly rare specimen, the likes of which there may not be a good comparison for. I think the same thing could be said for Nolan Smith or Tyreek Stevenson or one of those guys as well. As deep as this roster is now, I think you have to look at a freshman who breaks out as just a very different kind of player than anything that Georgia's experienced under Kirby Smart up to this point, because it is not going to be easy for freshmen to play on this team this year.
Yeah, maybe to me it would go hand in hand, Brandon, and I like kind of what you're cooking there. But to me, if a Georgia freshman breaks through now, it's probably a combination of two things. Number one, this kid is really special, and number two, a lot of those second-year guys or third-year guys in the program just got left, and they just got kind of hurdled over by one of these hard chargers or whatever. I think the only places on the roster where the Georgia roster, and it is a stacked roster, you're thinking about merit rather than need. I still think you kind of have to look to a spot like wide receiver, especially with what Mr. Pickens and Mr. Blaylock can bring to the fold. I mean, especially with Georgia liking to bring 7 or 8 receivers to a lot of SEC games, especially for special teams. I think those guys are maybe the two where you want to see one of those two guys. I don't know if everybody will feel as salty about the receiver core or as sporty about the receiver core unless Pickens or Blaylock, one of those two, really starts making a little bit of plays for Georgia, and you're hearing a lot of buzz of those guys coming out of fall camp. I think that's an expectation where a guy can make a move up the depth chart there as well, and maybe even Brett Seither to some extent, because Georgia's got to get to 3 or 4 really good tight ends for everything they like to run with all of their jumbo and their 2-times packages and everything else. Those are things to consider. Guys that bust through, I see what you're saying. This is totally a different roster than the one that Kirby Smart started stocking up for the 2017 and 2018 season. And this is going to be even more exasperated in 2019 as well, Brandon.
Yeah,
when you look on those special team squads and you see Nolan Smith on special teams, you see guys like Tyreek Stevenson on special teams. Oh man, that's going to be it's going to be fun. You maybe don't go get in the line for your Coca-Cola at Sanford Stadium when somebody's about to punt.
That's a really, really fun thing to imagine. It's our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. You can become a Marlowe's Insider by texting the word Marlowe's, M-A-R-L-O-W-S, no apostrophe, M-A-R-L-O-W-S, to 24242. And you can find out about big events happening in the tavern there in your neighborhood or special offers as well. I can't say anything about this yet, but it does sound like we may have a fun event coming up at a Marlowe's Tavern again really soon, which I'm really excited about that. I'll look forward to when I can give you details. Cannot give you those right now. Jeff, let me do a couple quick things before we get ready to wrap up. And something else that you've written this week. Sometimes we like to toss around nicknames. Maybe got to start calling 4-star wide receiver Justin Robinson like Bitcoin or something like that, because it certainly seems like Georgia got in on the ground floor on Robinson at the right time, because it seems like since his UGA commitment or around the time that he commits to UGA, based on your reporting, all of a sudden he's getting a lot of interest here. Georgia getting in early on Robinson, is that going to be enough to hold off some would-be suitors for him?
I think so, because he really likes Georgia. The one school that I think maybe had a puncher's chance in there would have been Clemson, but Clemson's not really knocking on the door maybe the way some other schools do. But Robinson is very interesting. He is, I guess I would say, what's that line? A mystery wrapped up in a riddle. He's an enigma, Brandon. And what I mean by that is he's only played 1 year of high school ball, 6'4", 210. Got plus size. He will be one of those guys at the Atlanta opening regional on Sunday. DawgNation and the crew and the Before the Hedges gang will all be there covering that as well. But very interesting because his freshman year, he had a knee injury. His sophomore year, he had to sit out because of a transfer. So when that junior film started circulating at that size, you saw a lot of things that people really liked. And basically, since he's committed to Georgia, a lot of schools have told him, well, we're not going to stop trying. You're still a value and a need for our program as well. So, Justin Robinson is another guy that you think about the wide receiver class and their names that are hovering, DJ Williams, Rakeem Jarrett, folks like that. Robinson is a big piece, and he's a big piece for those that want to see that big body type receiver, especially those that are flourishing so well right now at Clemson.
All right, two other quick things here. I could not help but notice on Twitter, Warren Brinson, a name a lot of Georgia fans are well of, former UGA commit, does put out on social media that he's planning on being in Athens this weekend. Jeff, Brinson would seem to be something that Georgia needs more of, 300-plus pound defensive lineman. Brinson did decommit, wanted to open things back up. Where does all of this stand now? Is Georgia still interested? I mean, I guess they're at least interested enough to host him on a visit. Brinson's at least interested enough to come by. Where do things stand now with the one-time UGA commit?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I even remarked on Twitter that it was interesting that he's making his first visit to Georgia since the time when he both decommitted and committed. Of course, those didn't happen on the same day. But with Brinson, he's a defensive tackle option. I think maybe a defensive tackle, and, the board is always up and down. But I think a defensive tackle, maybe the other name for folks to latch onto is Alex Huntley, a little bit out of the Hammond School in Columbia, South Carolina. He posted his top 6 over the weekend, and Georgia was clearly in there. And Georgia has been kind of in his wheelhouse as one of his, most well-known and most well-developed relationships for quite some time. I think he kept his Georgia offer as his pinned tweet for quite some time. He only removed it to put his top 6 in there. Alex Huntley, that's the nation's number 16 defensive tackle, about 6'4.5", about 305. Really good athlete, really, really good student coming out of the Hammond School as well with a 3.4 GPA. That's a defensive tackle to think about. And the other thing I thought maybe I'd get a mention on the D&D from you about this week, Brandon, was that all the Justin Flo interest right now, and all the Justin Flo chatter, as Brandon likes to say, that's circulating around. I tweeted out a clip of him earlier this week. I think it was yesterday, where he just absolutely went Trey Blackman on somebody, or even Thomas Davis, Greg Blue on somebody on Twitter. And, I mean, that's a 5-star linebacker. He's even more highly rated than Kendall Milton in the 2020 class out of the state of California. And he did take a visit to Georgia along with one of those multi-stop tours as well. And by all reports and accounts, that one went very well. Very, very well.
That's definitely a story worth watching as well. One more quick thing to squeeze in, and I know you'll keep this quick because you're going to tell me this ain't happening. At least I'm assuming you're going to tell me that, because oftentimes when recruits say these kinds of things, it doesn't end up materializing. You and I have talked about this a million times over the years. However, that said, could not help but notice Julian Fleming saying that he and Rakeem Jarrett are going to be playing together sometime soon. It certainly seems that there's been a lot of chatter on social media from Jarrett, coming off of his Georgia visit not too long ago. And then he's talking to Bleacher Report about doing his commitment video and everything else. And then Fleming says, y'all go follow Rakeem Jarrett. We're about to be, whatever it was that he said, we just showed it on video, best duo in the country or whatever, essentially insinuating they're going to play together. Could Georgia sign both Rakeem Jarrett and Julian Fleming, Jeff? Two really good wide receivers?
Well, there's also things like, Brandon could be doing DawgNation daily from the top of the largest hotel in the world in Dubai.
That's right.
But with that, maybe they're talking about an all-star game there, but if the tea leaves and chatter for those two young men have them going in kind of different places, and maybe, like I said, he's talking about an all-star game, but it'd be the point, Brandon, where if Georgia landed those two 5-star receivers, what would your reaction be? Would this almost be like shooting fish in a barrel when it comes to recruiting now for the University of Georgia, when it's basically like going up to the menu at Marlowe's Tavern and just picking out whatever you want?
That would certainly be that. And I think that enjoying that level of success is something that Georgia needs to do. I will tell you, Jeff, speaking as a fan, I've got a lot more confidence in Cortez Hankton as a recruiter now than I used to. So when it comes to some of these big names, it wasn't that long ago that I wasn't sure that Hankton was going to be able to pull those guys. I given the way that some of the Hazelwood stuff went down, I just wasn't sure what kind of impact Hankton was making. But then you've heard Hankton's name mentioned by a number of recruits recently as really instrumental in why they're considering Georgia. So, yeah, I mean, I have now moved receiver into the same category that I've put most of these other position groups of, hey, I'm not going to say never about anything.
Well, you know, Brandon, that to me, it would be very interesting after the end of the 2020 cycle if folks start looking at the recruiter rankings and how well the guys performed. And it might be hard for guys like Sam Pittman and Dell McGee to hold on to their alpha ace recruiter status for the Bulldogs when not because of what they didn't do, but because of what guys like Todd Hartley and Cortez Hankton did in this class. And, you know, Brandon, I think we were talking about this when we were in Athens on Wednesday before the Hedges. And, you know, that 7 5-star number, now I don't know if Georgia's going to sign more than 21, 22 guys in this class, but I think that 7 5-star number was within reach. And, I mean, folks out there on the DawgNation forum are wondering, can Georgia get to 8 or 9 in the 2020 class?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of guys that Georgia has a strong chance for right now in this 2020 class, where you start mentioning things like a pair of 5-star receivers, a pair of 5-star running backs, a pair of 5-star tight ends, a pair of 5-star outside linebackers. There's already a 5-star tackle committed. There's the potential of a 5-star quarterback, you know, earning a 5th star in Carson Beck. And you know what? I'm not going to rule out anything that involves Georgia hitting that 7 or 8 5-star tally in 2020 at this time.
That's a really, really interesting concept to think about, and looking forward to getting some recruiting coverage this weekend. As you said, big event in the Atlanta area. DawgNation is going to be all over that. Jeff, we'll look forward to reading and seeing and hearing a whole bunch from you on that. Thanks for being with us, part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. DawgNation Daily folks, don't forget to check out Marlowe's. Become a Marlowe's Insider. Text the word Marlowe's, MARLOWS, 24242. You can find out about special offers and big events happening at the tavern right there in your neighborhood, including when DawgNation's going to be back again very soon. Jeff, enjoy the weekend. We'll look forward to speaking back here next week on DawgNation Daily.
All right, Brandon. Enjoy yourself, sir.
See you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
See, sometimes you got to kind of slow play Jeff just a little bit, and you got to kind of toss it out there to him and kind of let him take it where he wants to go. Unsolicited, pretty interesting information on Alex Huntley, the big defensive lineman from South Carolina. Good stuff on Flo as well. Pretty good job by Jeff Sintel dropping those little extra nuggets into the conversation as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All today. I have to tell you, I thought that was really fun. Before I do the SEC Through, let me also remind you about this, that one of the great things about your local Atlanta Kroger, the Kroger closest to you, is one of my favorite items. Not just something that my family likes to drink, but something we like to use as a recipe for a lot of the foods we make. I'm talking about real milk made from Georgia dairy cows. First of all, I love the great legacy of agriculture that the state of Georgia has. I grew up in Hall County, kind of a rural part of Hall County. You know, you drive and you just see those, fields, farms, long way to go. Down in South Georgia, there's even more of that kind of stuff. I'm proud of that connection that Georgia has to that, and I just like real milk. I just think I think it tastes good. I think it's good for you, and Kroger has got it from those Georgia dairy cows. And a lot of you do drink it, but what you may not also realize is you're making macaroni and cheese, you're making shrimp and grits, just like nothing of milkshakes, which I'll probably at times like more than I should. Milk is the big ingredient and all that kind of stuff. So we love real milk around here. My family loves it. Georgia dairy cows, I'm proud to know that it's coming right here from our state, and I'm glad it's as convenient as a trip to my local Kroger to get it all taken care of. So huge thanks to Kroger for keeping the shelves stocked with real milk from Georgia dairy cows, and we appreciate them being a part of DawgNation Daily here as well. So I'm sure a lot of you are kind of overindulged on March Madness at this point in time. A lot of basketball yesterday. Pretty good day for the SEC overall. By the way, we'll have an update coming up in a moment on our DawgNation Daily Bracket Contest. My understanding is we have a total of 5 perfect brackets. So if you're one of those, congratulations. You'll get your name mentioned on the show in just a moment. Connor Riley, our producer, he's too modest to admit, he is 1 game shy of a perfect bracket. I am not 1 game shy of a perfect bracket. I lost a few here. But SEC teams did put a perfect bracket together yesterday. LSU holds on against Yale, 79-74. believe the Eli's may have come on and covered that one at the end, though, I believe. Florida does take down Nevada 70-61, so you can't have everything you want in life. So the Wolfpack not able to get that done yesterday. Auburn holds on against New Mexico State as well in the 5-12 matchup. And then Kentucky, very comfortable over Abilene Christian. I've said, though, and I joked about this during our R.S. Andrews cool down yesterday, I do have Wofford beating Kentucky in round 2, which I know is a little bit of a stretch and a bit of a reach. But, listen, we've seen Kentucky struggle in these tournament games in the past. Wofford, statistically speaking, is a better team than you might imagine. They haven't lost in like forever, a million years. I think that could be a fun one there with Wofford and Kentucky. By the way, the exact opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to SEC basketball. SEC teams winning on day 1 of the NCAA tournament. How about 2 coaches? It looks like there are reports out there that are about to part ways. There were reports last night that Alabama was negotiating a buyout with its coach, Avery Johnson. Johnson came in as a one-time, I think, NBA Coach of the Year. He won NBA Coach of the Year, right? This is a guy that, with Dallas Mavericks coach, been around, kind of a big name when he came in there, but not a lot of NCAA tournament experience. They had Colin Sexton. They had that kind of, big-name guy for a while, but it just really hasn't happened in Tuscaloosa, especially in comparison to what Bruce Pearl's been able to do in Auburn. Bryce Drew also looks like he's on his way out at Vanderbilt after the Commodores went winless in the SEC this season. As the SEC becomes a better basketball league, it is no longer quite as tolerable to not be very good, and I think you're seeing the natural byproduct of the pressure that exists in football and all the money that can be made by being good spilling over now into basketball, where people want to have what Tennessee has. People want to have what Auburn has had, what Kentucky has obviously had for generations. Other SEC teams want to bite of that too. Tom Crean's choosing to swim in those waters. And he's getting involved with some big-time recruits. Obviously, Georgia's had great success, including Anthony Edwards. But Crean next year will coach with some of the same pressure that just did in Bryce Drew and just did in apparently Avery Johnson, where the expectation of the SEC now, even for so-called football schools, is to win in basketball. All right, let me do a couple other football stories here real quick. There was an interesting exchange at Florida this week with Florida coach Dan Mullen and a reporter over the status of the quarterbacks. Now, I'm not going to play the audio for you because the fact is y'all don't want to hear Dan Mullen speak. But, Mullen was questioned about the open competition, so to speak, at quarterback. And, is that going on? And Mullen seems to be trying to have this both ways, saying, hey, we got a competition every single week, but everybody knows that Felipe Franks is the starter. For some Florida fans, though, they're scratching their head about this because Franks was pulled in a game this past season against Missouri where the Gators didn't look very good. I thought this entire exchange from Mullen, frankly, ends up being pretty weird because Florida fans now for a while have grown really tired of coaches trying to force a quarterback down their throat. It was Luke Del Rio at one point. It's been Felipe Franks now a couple of different times. Florida fans are ready for good quarterback play. Now, for the most part, I do think the Gators fans, at least the ones that I talk to, are fairly confident in Franks. But I don't think Mullen did him any services this week with the way that he's talked about this situation. Mullen seems to want to pretend that Franks' perch as the starting quarterback at Florida is more solid than it really is. I don't know that's necessarily true because I think when you go back and look at the totality of Frank's season a year ago, frankly, it wasn't that consistent, and certainly it wasn't that spectacular other than a couple of, the occasional fleeting moments. So I think the Florida quarterback story is going to be one to watch, and if Dan Mullen, if Florida fans sour on him at any point quickly, I do believe the quarterback may be the reason why. He's supposed to be one of these quarterback whisperers, supposed to be a guy that can get more out of less when it comes to quarterback. If that be the case, how about you do something with Felipe Franks, and we'll see how that goes in 2019. One more thing, and I'll do this real quick. South Carolina also had its pro day this week, and former Florida coach, South Carolina coach Will Muschamp, was talking about the need to get more NFL-type players there at South Carolina. Now, in the recruiting class, at least in this past year, it looks like they have a future defensive lineman in that regard, Zach Pickens. That was a pretty good job by Muschamp. But overall, as the SEC East has gotten better, I don't think any program has suffered from that rise more so than South Carolina. I thought a year ago that Muschamp was on his verge of actually building something pretty substantial at South Carolina. Maybe the most formidable threat to Georgia in the East, I thought was going to be Muschamp in South Carolina. With the way that Tennessee is recruited, with the way that Florida has won on the field, even Missouri, it becomes a lot harder to believe that. I think that 2019, both with its recruiting class going into the 2020 cycle and on the field for the Gamecocks this fall, I think once again we're talking about that being a pivotal one for Muschamp. will make that your SEC through. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, before I update you on our DawgNation bracket contest, and as I said before, we're just doing this for fun. This is not, something that we're doing. This is no promotion. We don't want anything from you. We're just doing this kind of for fun. But we did have close to 1,000, I want to say, entrants into this, and 5 perfect brackets after day 1. So we'll congratulate those folks here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let me talk Zamir White just for a moment, because I thought that Kirby Smart gave a pretty interesting update on White this week. And at least to me, it seems like Kirby's taking this recovery from White maybe a little different than the one from White a year ago, and maybe the Chubb recovery from 2016. It certainly seems like for now, Smart and this UGA staff content to take things a little slow from Zamir White. Here is Kirby from Tuesday.
Well, I don't know that I can answer how much of it. I mean, that's going to come into fall camp. I think anytime you have a non-contact ACL and then you have a second one, you've got to be careful because we're talking about 2 different knees and really a completely non-contact injury. So when that happens, makes you wonder, hey, is the kid going to be able to progress this time as fast as he did last time? So for us, he's going to be able to do some. I mean, he's running really well. He's doing a lot of straight line stuff. He's just not going to be involved in the scrimmaging and the contact part. So ultimately, how do I know he's going to contribute to the team? I don't know that. I'm not going to know that until probably early in fall camp. I'm very pleased with his work ethic. I mean, he knows that's his future. He takes care of his knee. He rehabs hard. He does everything we ask him to do. I think Ron is kind of one of the best in the country at dealing with this. When you look at the significant injuries he's dealt with Gurley and Nick Chubb, especially at that position. So he has somebody really good to rely on in regards to that. And Samir's managed that really well.
So ultimately, I don't really know what to make of this. I guess it does make me long for the days a year ago when Kirby was talking about how fast Zamir White was recovering. I'll give you a specific instance. Do you remember, and we've played the audio a few times on DawgNation Daily, when Kirby was asked about Devod Wilson and could he come back from his injury? And Kirby said something to the effect of, well, if he's recovering as fast as Zamir White is, maybe he will be able to do that. Those little nuggets that Kirby would occasionally drop in that discussed just how well Zamir was doing with his first knee injury, the one that he suffered while he was still in high school. You certainly don't get that from Kirby there. It doesn't mean that White isn't on his way to a speedy recovery, and it doesn't mean that he won't be a big contributor in his first year officially playing football for Georgia in 2019. There's just no giveaway from Smart on that. Obviously, there's no need to rush things with Zamir White. Georgia's got plenty of depth at running back, and for White to make a big impact, you don't really need that until later on in the season anyway. There's certainly no crucial reason for this to happen during the spring. But for those of us who want to hear kind of a hopeful word on Kirby when it comes to White, at least for now, Kirby's holding off on that. All right, so let me congratulate our bracket contest leaders for right now. And if you're watching on video, we'll show you these names on the screen. Ron Elgin 1, G.A. Dog 64, Running Mama 1976, Steve Big Dog, and then ESPN 103 54801. If that's your handle on the contest there, you had a perfect bracket after yesterday. Now, there's 16 more games today, so obviously holding on to that perfect bracket is going to be a challenge. But we'll keep updating this because the winner of our bracket contest is going to get a pretty significant prize pack here from our friends at DawgNation and DawgNation Daily. So stay tuned on that, and good luck this weekend. For those of you who've chosen to participate, we really appreciate you being a part of this. And by the way, let me also say on our way out the door here on this Friday, it has now been 874 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten UGA. It's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great weekend. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down, and a great way to go into the weekend talking little dogs here. So huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making this possible. Their support of this allows us to do what we do. So when you're thinking about heating, air, plumbing, electrical, I hope you'll think about my friends at R.S. Andrews. Dari and the gang there, they're just good sports folks. You know they got 1,000 brackets going here, too. A lot of sheets filled out and a lot of pools. They're just, they're sports fans, right? They just do that kind of stuff. So if you want somebody like you to do the work you need around your home, please check them out, rsandrews.com. It's rsandrews.com. Great friends of us here at DawgNation Daily, and really, really thank them for bringing the R.S. Andrews cool down to us each and every day. With that said, I do have to kind of get off the air here semi-on time, or whatever on time even means now. Y'all can save your own jokes for that. But we got a couple things we got to do today. So I need to rattle through some comments kind of quick, and then after that, we kind of got to bolt today. So I apologize in advance if we don't do quite as many comments as you've come to expect here, but we'll do as many as we can. Robert Barnes says the SEC strong in baseball too. Yeah, it really is, and it's fun. And I'll tell you from a baseball standpoint, it's fun to have Georgia be a part of this. This is one of those things where my professional behavior and my personal fan behavior are very different. The thing that I'm probably most excited about this weekend from a sports fan standpoint, probably even more so than March Madness, is this 3-game baseball set that Georgia has coming with LSU. I know that's not necessarily something that y'all want to talk a ton about, but I'm into this now. I mean, the Friday starter that Georgia has, Emerson Hancock, is a really, really good pitcher. He is really fun to watch. That game tonight is not on the SEC Network regular television. It's SEC Network Plus for that tonight. But SEC Network the next 2 days. Y'all don't want me to talk a ton of baseball on the show. I know you want to keep it mostly to football, and so that's what we'll do. I kind of play the hits. I satisfy the audience when it comes to that. But from a fan standpoint, you better believe I'm tuned in. I'm dialed in. I don't believe I'm going to be able to attend any of the games. I was going to try to go to Saturday's game, but it looks like that's going to coincide a little too closely with what's going on with the football practice. So I'll have to do a little work around that. But I'm really excited about Georgia hosting LSU this weekend. I think that's going to be a fun deal, a really fun deal. Will Strange says, who's going to replace Hot Rod next year? Do we have someone in place or recruiting anyone? Well, Will, I would invite you to check out some of the reporting that Jeff Sintel's done on that over the last couple of weeks. He's actually kind of went into pretty good detail about the next kicker beyond Rodrigo Blankenship. So I'll invite you to check that out. And you're right, it's not too soon to start thinking about that kind of stuff. James Crump says, as long as Georgia's winning, you can talk baseball. Well, James, I think that's probably a pretty good point, that as this team does win, and I think it's probably going to, I guess. I honestly, I can't handicap the rest of the SEC, but it was certainly an impressive showing last week at South Carolina. I do think James is right that more people will kind of come on board for that. And I think the same thing would be true in basketball as well. We get a lot of pushback when we talk any basketball around here, and I understand where that comes from. Even if I'm a personal fan of the team, I have to respect what the overall balance of the audience kind of wants, and the numbers speak for themselves in that regard. I do think, though, it would change just a bit if Georgia really went on a spectacular run. If Anthony Edwards comes in next year and leads a Georgia team capable of being in the NCAA tournament. We haven't had a tournament game for Georgia since I've been doing the show. I don't think. But if that were to happen, I think more people would be in on that story then than kind of are now. I think it's going to be the same thing come late May, early June. If Georgia's playing regionals, super regionals, possibly on its way to Omaha, I think the excitement of that in kind of a downtime for football, I think we may baptize a few more baseball fans that may not quite know that's what they'll be. The Diamond Dogs bandwagon may start to fill up a bit at that point in time. Jennifer Caldwell Sperlin says, didn't we look at a kid in the Carolinas for a kicker? Yeah, that's the one that I guess he visited Georgia and then like 2 days later committed to Stanford or something like that. The honest truth is, I think that kicking recruiting is kind of interesting in the fact that sometimes it's sort of hard to tell who's going to pan out and who's going to turn out to be what. To me, that's a very, very erratic evaluation to make. There are some people, there's some people who do that for a living, obviously. But yeah, it'll be worth watching. My thing when it comes to kickers is, how about you bring in a lot and let's see, kind of who emerges from that and shake the hands of the guys who don't quite, work out. That's kind of the way that I would handle kicker, because I think it's very hard to look at a guy in high school and say, oh, he's going to become what Rodrigo Blankenship became, because Rodrigo became that over the course of his career, both in terms of how he improved on his touchbacks and how he, just maintained a level of accuracy with his field goals, even in pressure situations. I just think that, watch the NFL from year to year. The guy who's like the best kicker one year is out of the league the next, it seems like. I think that kicking is a very, very difficult thing to probably assess. It's easy to know who's got the skills to pop up the extra points and who's got the hips and the leg to put the ball in the end zone and a touchback. But how are you going to handle the pressure situation that comes when 92,000 people are all watching you and you got to try to make that big field goal? Evaluating the intangible part of the kicking position, my guess, is a pretty difficult thing to do. Let me go over here to YouTube here for a moment, get a few comments over there. And by the way, no matter what you're doing this weekend, hope you're getting ready to enjoy it. Chevron hand on the subject of Monty Rice. Could he be a first-round draft pick? I think in the case of Monty, my guess is that he'll probably end up being a little south of that when his evaluation is done at the end of his career. As we said before, I think that Monty does some really good things for Georgia. I think that one of the things you like to see from those first-round, type linebackers, first of all, those guys in the interior linebacking spot, I mean, the NFL doesn't seem like always love those guys the first round of a draft as it is. In the case of Monty, the side-to-side lateral quickness, the side-to-side speed, the guy like Roquan Smith has shown, Nakobe Dean will show, Channing Tindall might show this year. That's not, to me, so much Monty Rice's game. Could I see him find a home in the NFL because of his physical toughness? I probably could, but he's one of those guys that's probably not going to wow you as much with combine performances and things like that, which might be a little bit of an issue if you're talking about him being drafted incredibly high. Jacob Thompson says, ask Blair Walsh if kicking is a year-to-year love-hate relationship. Yeah, Jacob's right about that. Right about that for sure. Apparently Dapper Dan's going through Knoxville, and Kelly Burnett says, be sure to wear a surgical mask when you go through there. That's pretty funny. Dallas Schwartz says, BA does a 60-40 run pass. The balance you feel we need to equate to winning the national championship? That's a really good question. I don't know so much about the overall percentage of run plays and pass plays. I probably should, do some math in my head based on some of the other track records to kind of decide how I feel about that. My very simple answer on this, and some people may say it's too simplistic, but my very simple answer on this is I just think Georgia needs a little bit more. I think it needs a little bit more. And we were having this conversation off the air the other day, and Connor and Jeff were saying, yeah, but if you look at the games that Georgia lost, Georgia didn't lose because of a lack of passing yards. Essentially insinuated they had some of those against Alabama. And I understand where that's coming from. I do get that. I think, though, that there is a difficulty probably examining how games could have been different if Georgia just had more offensive weapons. The LSU game in particular. A game like that, it seemed like Georgia just didn't have both of its fists up, right? And I think more deep receiving threats and a willingness to utilize those receiving threats would have made Dave Aranda's defensive game plan against Georgia a lot more difficult. And had Georgia won that game, even if the SEC championship had played out the way that it did, I think excluding Georgia from the playoff would have been a much more difficult thing to do. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or not. For me, it's not so much about the percentage of run plays and pass plays. I think what Kirby Smart said about this week mostly makes sense. As I said before, the only word I would change about anything that Kirby said about this, because I agree with like 90% of everything he said about the offense, the only word that I would wish would be a little bit different, instead of him saying, can we pass it when we need to, or can we pass it when we have to, I would just suggest, can Georgia be an offense that looks for opportunities to pass it? Even if you stick 65% of the time with the running game because you're winning by 3 touchdowns, that's fine with me. But are you looking for opportunities to exploit defenses, and do you have the kind of playmakers who are able to do that, the kind of wide receivers that run away from people, for instance? That to me is what a national championship offense looks like. It's the kind of offense that goes all in when it sees the opportunity to. Connor Riley joins us.
So we had Jeff, you and myself, we had a very lively discussion off the air that sort of bled in on the air on Before the Hedges on this subject of balance and how much does it matter. I sort of subscribe to the Mike Leach theory and disagree with you that I think balance in offense is overrated. But
hold on now. Before you move on, I didn't say I need Georgia to be balanced. I didn't say that. I just
I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
I think it's an overrated talk.
Mm-hmm.
My good day UGA today, the focus was on Charlie Warner, but it's also, I did a deep dive on James Coley's offenses and how they compare to Jim Chaney's. 2 biggest statistical takeaways. In Coley's 3 years as an offensive coordinator, tight ends caught about 49 balls per season.
Yeah.
Making up roughly about 20% of all completion. Under Chaney, they average about 35 catches a year, roughly 15% of all completion. So you can expect tight ends to get involved a little bit more. Secondly, we talk about that run-pass balance and sort of where you would think it would like to be. 2017, Georgia threw the ball on 32% of its plays. I believe it was 113th in the country in terms of passing plays.
Yeah.
This past season, it went up a little bit, but still under 40%, came in at 39% pass plays compared to 61%. Under James Coley, about every year at Miami, he came in right around 50%.
And I'm guessing, although I'm not looking side by side, that, and I know you would agree with this, that part of that number for Miami is going to be skewed by the fact that it's not winning every one of its division games more than 2 touchdowns. So
Correct.
Part of Georgia's run balance or imbalance in favor of the run is also due to the fact that Georgia's just winning games and therefore winning teams at all levels of football, NFL, as pass happy as the NFL is, teams that are winning have a tendency to run the ball a bit more.
Yeah.
But I do think that's overall really interesting. And one thing that I'll say is, while we would all, as fans, you just want productive plays, right? You almost don't really care who gets the ball. I do think, though, when you throw to the tight end more, I just think it gives defenses more to think about. I think that a passing play with tight ends on the field, a passing play with 2 tight ends on the field even, I think that really forces defenses to be on their toes. I thought, unfortunately, to go back to Aranda a moment ago from LSU, I thought he won that chess match. Whether it's a chess match with Kirby Smart's philosophy or a chess match with Jim Chaney's play calling, I thought last year in Baton Rouge, and the kind of game that Georgia has to win if it wants to win a national championship, I thought Aranda won that chess match. And I think that if you're throwing on a 2 tight end sets, if you're throwing to those tight ends over the middle of the field, all of a sudden it's a lot easier for defensive coordinators to look smart because, I mean, it takes a lot of personnel to fully account for tight ends who might catch the ball. So from that standpoint, Connor, I hope you're right. I hope Georgia does throw to the tight ends more. Even if it doesn't throw the ball all that much more in general, I wouldn't mind seeing the tight ends get a few more receptions because I do think Georgia needs to use the middle of the field more with its offense. And I think it needs to defensive coordinators to have that extra thing they have to think about.
Yeah, and, I get the feeling that in Chaney's offense, passes to tight ends, they weren't scripted a whole lot. One, in part because in the 2017 season, when Jake Fromm was a freshman, you like to imagine it was a more scripted offense in terms of what was done, and it wasn't so much Fromm freelancing as much. The tight ends only had about 15 catches. And then you look at some of the games this year, when Georgia went hurry up and was sort of making it up on the fly, Isaac Nada, that's where I would say a bulk of his catches, in the Florida game most prominently, came from just when it's going hurry up, scatter shot, let's go, let's get something quickly instead of the traditional Chaney build it out and let's make sure we know where everyone is going at all times.
All right, let me do 3 quick things here on this subject. I'm going to try to do them semi-rapid fire. We played the audio of Warner earlier saying that he thought that Coley's instinct was to pass a little bit more. I love Charlie Warner. I think that's probably wishful thinking. Do you agree?
No.
Okay. Second thing, when you look at some of the reasons why Nada wasn't getting the ball like circa 2016, early 2017, do you feel like that was Kirby saying he hasn't earned the right to catch passes because of a lack of physicality, or was that, hey, the offense is just going somewhere else?
No, I think it's the offense going somewhere else, and I think Nada had a very strong relationship with Jacob Eason at freshman.
And then the third thing is, and this is, I think, really interesting, Randy Hall mentions Arik Gilbert and Darnell Washington. Do you think that Georgia might be encouraged to throw to tight ends more because it's got 2 historically good tight end recruits that has a chance to bring in, and therefore there's a little motivation to throw Warner's way to say, hey, that's what you're going to get next year for both Gilbert and Washington because Georgia would like to have them both?
I don't think Kirby or Coley are thinking about that when they're designing the offense, but it is something they'll have to and be able to address with Gilbert Washington when they ask, how often are tight ends getting involved in this offense?
Matt Rukavina says, fact or fiction, Georgia has the best offensive line this year. I say fact. Obviously, I can't tell you about the other 129 offensive lines that are in the country. I'll simply say, or at least all of them, I'll simply say this. I can't imagine there are too many offensive lines as deep as what Georgia has. Because, for now, we don't fully know who the starting 5 is going to be. We think we have an idea. We know the 2 tackle spots are well occupied. We assume the 2 guard spots might be well occupied with the 2 2016 signees with Cleveland on the right side and Kinley on the left side. Obviously, it's the guard, it's just the center position that's kind of up for grabs right now. But you certainly left this week thinking that Trey Hill is the point spread favorite to emerge in that job, given the fact that he played that position some last year. So if I've got Hill at center, Kinley at Cleveland at guard, and I wouldn't rule out hearing somebody pushing somebody at that guard spot, although, who knows, we'll wait and see. But I wouldn't rule out something happening with one of those guard spots. Wilson and Thomas, the two tackles. As a Georgia fan, I don't think you have a right to ask for a better offensive line than that. I feel
you have
like
six guys with significant starting experience coming back in the two tackles, Cleveland Mays, Kinley, and Trey Hill, who started, I believe, the SEC championship game last year when Cleveland was out. So I find it hard to believe based on pedigree, working with Sam Pittman, starting experience, there's a better offensive line coming back to college.
Let me read Robert Barnes' comment, who says, going back to the offensive thing for a moment, he says, you can't have it both ways. You got to have two tight ends and throw more than 20-plus put-yard passes down the field. Remember, our offensive line was young last year and often injured, so we need tight ends to block more. Robert, I would disagree with the premise that you can't throw deep out of a two-tight end set. I just would. I think it's forcing defenses to make tough decisions of, the personnel looks one way, but I still got to think about something else. It's one of the reasons why Georgia goes out and gets a George Pickens, goes out and gets, maybe a Dominic Blaylock, what some of these guys can turn out to be. Guys who can, in a one-on-one situation, find a way just to beat their man because, listen, safety's got some tough choices to make when it comes to those two tight end sets, which, typically in, college football would, tend to lean towards a running play. You got a lot to think about there in that regard. If you've got a speed burner, go get it wide receiver on the outside, I would deny the premise that you can't throw deep out of that set. Malcolm Roosevelt McClung says, I dream about offensive lines. Well, Malcolm, I believe this is one you can certainly dream about. I do, and I think that it's one of the reasons why Georgia's not going to make significant changes to its offensive game plan because they've gone so far down the road with this offensive line as the nucleus. As much as you think about Georgia being running back university, it's really the offensive line that's in place now that attracts the running backs to it. Great running backs, Kendall Milton maybe, Marshawn Lloyd maybe in the future. They want to play in a program that's built the offensive line up as well as Georgia has built it up. So, yeah, this is the nucleus of the Georgia team, and this is the recipe they're going to try to use for winning a national championship. They've been close there in that regard, and I think with just a little bit of extra sauce sprinkled on top of that, they may finally be able to get over the hump when it comes to that. Couple of YouTube comments, then we have got to go. K9 Blues says, I know it's tough as I love Cleveland and Kinley. So he says, but basically what he's saying is, I love Solomon Kinley, I love Ben Cleveland, but Jamari Salyer is a generational talent. K9, I really think that this spring and summer heading into the fall is going to be a really interesting time for Salyer because I am of the belief that this ought to be a time that you really see something big from Salyer. And I think that he ought to push a Cleveland or a Kinley. Even if both those guys hold on to their starting job, I think that Salyer ought to push those guys. Now, I think that Cleveland, just given what he's looked like when he's healthy, is a little harder to push, and I mean that in more ways than one. But it's an interesting time for Salyer because I think of all the offensive linemen that Georgia signed, I mean, it's weird to say this now when you see how good Andrew Thomas has proven to be. I think that Jamari Salyer was maybe thought of as the surest thing that Georgia has signed along the offensive line up to this point. So, he dealt with a situation last year where Trey Hill came in as an early enrollee. He used that experience to his advantage and had the opportunity to sort of gain that early playing time and then use that to his advantage to be far along by the time you got to the end of the year. But Salyer's now been around for a while, gone through a full season, going into his first spring, but his second year on campus. I think it's going to be really interesting how much Salyer is able to push one of those two guards or Trey Hill at center. I guess let's not discount that as a potential competition as well, that it could be Salyer versus Hill at center as much as it is anything else. But I guess my instinct is it's probably Hill more at center and Salyer pushing one of the two guards for right now. But I guess anything's possible when it comes to all of that.
I would just say, as hyped as Jamari Salyer was, it's not like Trey Hill was a slouch as a recruit either. I believe he was a top 35 national recruit.
You talking about Hill?
Yeah,
that's
Hill.
Totally fair. Totally fair.
Number 2 overall guard in the class.
Totally fair.
So he was still getting a very good player. He just wasn't
a very intense recruiting battle that Georgia won too.
Yes.
By the way, very intense battle. So that's a fair point. Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
Dan Riggins with a question that I'm going to retort. He says Sawyer is too tall to play center, and I do think that height is something that factors in at playing center more so than the other positions. Sawyer's a bigger guy, but Hill is every bit as of a mammoth as Sawyer is.
Yeah.
So height, I don't think is the reason why Sawyer won't get on the field or isn't projected to be the starter. And Kirby Smart came out pretty publicly and endorsed Hill as he's going to be the one. He's going to be the starter at least through spring practice.
Yeah.
It is his to lose.
That's about as outspoken as Kirby's going to be about an individual player, which, to your point, Double R also mentions Cade Mays having something to say about one of those guard spots too. That's probably a fair point. You got to include Mays in there on that discussion as well. And as of now, if we're ranking 1 through 10 or whatever, I mean, there's no doubt that Mays is ahead of Sawyer. So there's no doubt about that. Now, Georgia also really likes to have, like if you like basketball, the concept of a sixth man. Georgia likes that sixth man offensive lineman who can play multiple spots. And I reckon there's probably not anybody who could play more offensive line spots in the Georgia roster than Cade Mays could, right? He could play both tackles if he had to. He could play both guard spots if he had to. I mean, there's no one more versatile than Cleveland may one day turn out to be that way, but there's no one more versatile right now on this roster at the offensive line than Mays is probably.
Cade Mays is a no doubt about it starting offensive lineman for 129 other teams.
He really is. He really is. So,
and Georgia's very lucky to have him.
One of the things you like about Mays is not only is he has this nice reputation, but he's shown in the field. I mean, I think the people that evaluate this stuff for a living would tell you that when Mays has played, he's played pretty well. All right, I'm going to get yelled at if I don't get off the air, so we've really got to go. Good luck to the baseball team this week. Oh, yeah, by the way, K9 Blues, one more thing here, too. You mentioned Notori Johnson. So Notori Johnson now officially listed as a defensive lineman. This is a full-blown experiment now. No more, I guess, for now, no more offensive line for Notori Johnson. He is going to give the defensive line a full go. So for those of you who are interested in Notori was a popular member of the Georgia's 2017 class. As it turns out now, Johnson is a full-time defensive lineman. By the way, what made me laugh is somebody on our YouTube comment section has now taken the moniker Top Fan. So there is a in mockery of the Facebook Top Fan status, someone on YouTube is now calling themselves Top Fan, which I have to say I think is really, really funny.
One thing on Notori quickly, I think he's got a chance to have a nice little spring for himself defensive line. Trayvon Walker hasn't come in yet.
Yeah.
David Marshall's still coming back from a foot injury.
Rochester's hurt and injured.
Rochester's hurt. I think he's got a chance to really impress if he works hard and plays well at the defensive line position.
Yeah, I think that would be very. I mean, listen, a lot of Georgia fans would be very, very happy to hear that, and me included, because Notori's a popular guy. All right, we got to go, and I apologize for that, but we'll see you back here on Monday. Good luck to the Diamond Dogs and all the other spring sports in action this weekend. It's a fun, busy time for all the spring stuff here around UGA. Kirby speaks on Saturday. No practice today. They do practice again on Saturday, so DawgNation will have plenty of coverage of that, and then we're back here on Monday, 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for bringing the R.S. Andrews cool down to you. Check them out online at rsandrews.com. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. They show up when you ask them to. They do the work that you only requested, and the price will not be a surprise. That is good news, and R.S. Andrews delivers it to you. rsandrews.com. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you back here Monday for DawgNation Daily.